Hi, Steve Armstrong here. I'm about to present a research seminar or webinar, and this is based on a research article that has just been accepted by the journal Frontiers in Psychology. This was accepted on the 9th of June this year. For anyone who wants to download the electronic version, then the digital object identifier code is shown there on the screen. This is a research project I've been involved with a colleague called Meng in Beijing University of Technology. We've been working together for quite some time in this field. So the title of the presentation then is The Influence of Leader-Follower Cognitive Style Similarity on Followers' Organizational Citizenship Behaviors. So quite a mouthful, but I'm hoping I can simplify that as we move in through the presentation. So what is the outcome variable of interest to this research, or the dependent variable as it's called? Well, it is something called organizational citizenship behaviors, which is a theory that's emerged over the past 20 years or so. So let me begin to explain what I mean by these OCBs, or organizational citizenship behaviors. So this is discretionary behavior that's not part of an employee's formal role requirements, but nevertheless enhances the effective functioning of the organization. And this was the seminal research work was done in this field by Organ, a guy in the States, back in 1998. It's one of the most important constructs in the field of human resource management, according to Ed Snape and Tom Redman in 2010. So it has a 30-year history, and there have been more than 2,000 articles published, and half of those have been published in the last 7 years. So it's still very much alive and kicking as a theory of organizational behavior. So the literature really underpins the importance of harnessing social and intellectual capital of our employees within the organization. And OCBs, as I'll refer to them from now on, contribute to significant improvements in both individual level and organizational level success. There's been a huge amount of research done by these names, Podsakoff, two brothers over in the States. Most studies of the antecedents of OCBs, or the causes of OCBs, are focused on individual level predictors, such as equity in the workplace. So is it an equitable place to be with a leader and his 20 or 30 subordinates? Is there a high level of trust? Does that impact OCBs? And relationship quality has been researched in the past to see its impact on these behaviors. But there have been calls more recently for more studies involving such things as social relationships and group level diversity. And this is where our research fits into the research agenda. So let me put a bit more flesh on the bone with regard to organizational citizenship behaviors. The theory has led to two main dimensions that constitute the totality of OCB. And within those two dimensions, there are a number of factors. Now, these are broken down in this way because there is a psychometric instrument that will measure leaders and subordinates' perceptions of organizational citizenship behaviors in the workplace. This is the instrument that people use to do their research. So the first dimension is referred to as OCBI, and that's organizational citizenship behaviors that are oriented towards individuals, other individuals within the organization. Now, two of the factors under this dimension are referred to as altruism, which is about behaviors aimed at helping other people with organizationally relevant tasks, And the second one is courtesy, and these are behaviours aimed at preventing work-related problems with others from occurring. So you could see that almost as a peacekeeping role. Now, there are a number of items in the questionnaire that purport to measure each of those two factors of altruism and courtesy. In the second dimension that makes up the overall construct are OCBO dimension, which is behaviours oriented towards the organisation rather than other individuals. And we have three factors in this dimension. One is sportsmanship, which is referring to a toleration of less than ideal circumstances without complaining in the organisation. Conscientiousness, behaviours that go well beyond the minimum role requirements as defined in the contract of employment. And civic virtue, these are behaviours that show an active interest in the life of the organisation, sometimes even in their personal lives. So there are consequences of each of these dimensions. So the consequences of OCBI, behaviours levelled at individuals, are that research has shown that it leads to improved employee performance. It leads to leaders giving higher appraisal ratings to subordinates who engage in these OCBI behaviours. And it also influences reward allocation decisions at the annual review. And this has all come from research over the past 20 years, valid and reliable research. Now, the consequences of OCBO, those behaviours directed towards the organisation itself, are again, and this is proven to be the case through reliable and valid research projects over the years and publications, is that OCBO behaviours lead to increased profitability of the organisation, increased efficiency within the organisation, and increased productivity. So that was the dependent variable that we want to try and assess. And the independent variable, so the thing of interest to us is how does cognitive style, individual differences in cognitive style, influence behaviours in the workplace? Now, let me just tell you a short story to try and underpin what I mean by individual differences in cognitive style. If I reflect back to a past chapter in my life when I was in electronic engineering, research, design, development, I was leading teams in design of complex electronic hardware in industrial computer systems, in the writing of software and firmware. And quite often, as you would expect, we would come be hit by technical problems. And so in order to try and address the problems and work our way through development, then I and many others typically would perhaps call a brainstorm meeting. So you pull together the individuals with the key knowledge, you get into a breakout room, and you present the problem and the nature of the problem, and then you have a brainstorm in a fairly unstructured way. Now, my anecdotal experience of these brainstorm meetings were that at times they seemed quite problematic in one sense, and certainly chaotic at times. And I would observe individual differences in terms of the way people operated in these meetings. Some people would have like ideas bouncing off the walls. Many of them, they seem to see the big picture, and that we have one idea after another, and you get two or three people of that type of thinking getting together, and you can understand how it might seem very chaotic. And so to try and make sense of what's going on in that sort of dynamic environment, I gave this quite some thought. And I remember speaking to a colleague after one of these meetings, and I said, Ray, I said, I have real problems in these meetings. There are ideas flying off the walls, bouncing off the walls, and I struggle to keep up, and it's a bit of a problem. And he turned to me and said, yeah, but Steve, you have a habit of coming back with an optimum solution, don't you? To which I thought, really, do I? So this set me on a period of reflection. And I was thinking this through during the day and during the evening, and I thought, I understand what this guy's saying, because what I would do after these meetings is I would assemble my thoughts. I'd try and pull together all the ideas. I'd try and group them and simplify things. And through a lot of analysis and reflection during the day and sometimes overnight, even in my sleep, and I would come back the next morning. I'd call another meeting, and I would take control of the meeting quite successfully, because what I'd done is to assimilate all that had been said and done, and I'd reduce it to 2 or 3 potential alternatives to solutions to the particular technical problem. And that allowed me to take control of the meeting and move towards some agreement on the way forward. Now, by this time, the more holistic thinkers, the idea generators, they would be bored with this particular problem and just want to skip on to other exciting projects. So this was my first insight into thinking about individual differences. Okay. So sometime later, I did an MBA to learn more about management as an engineer. The soft side, the social side. I was introduced to psychometrics on the MBA program. That led to me wanting to have a go in academia. I joined academia, and then by chance, I finished up meeting guys in Leeds University Business School, and I did a PhD in this area because the people I met were actually doing research into this phenomenon called cognitive style. So this is about individual differences psychology, the differences in the way individuals think, perceive. So here are some definitions. Myself and 2 co-authors in 2012 did a review of the whole field of cognitive style. And a definition we used was cognitive styles are consistent individual differences in how individuals perceive, how they think, how they process information, solve problems, learn, make decisions, and relate to other people. It's been argued to be a critical variable influencing organizational and individual behavior, and also management practice. And it's also been, this research has been going on since I traced in my literature review research into individual differences like this, going back to people like Galton and Cattell, famous psychologists going back to 1890. Michael Curtin in 2003 said that cognitive style is a better predictor of people's performance in particular situations than general abilities or intelligence. Now, expressions of the 2 anchor points of this continuum of cognitive styles favoured by some authors are described as analytic versus intuitive thinking types. So intuition refers to immediate judgment based on feeling and the adoption of a global perspective. Intuitive members of a team are more receptive to soft data. They often experience an immediate sense of knowing, which they cannot explain. Relying on gut reactions, they thrive on unstructured approaches to decision making, and they may jump about from topic to topic. And I just refer you back to my story of a minute or 2 ago. Analysis, which is at the opposite extreme of this cognitive style dimension, has been referred to as rationality, and this refers to judgment based on mental reasoning and with a real focus on detail. Analytic members tend to adopt a very systematic approach to the search for an understanding via logical step-by-step approaches, and they prefer a structured approach to decision making. Now, individual differences in work teams, for example, you imagine you have 2 or 3 extremely intuitive individuals and maybe 1 or 2 highly analytic individuals, and they're trying to work through problems in the workplace. And this can often, these individual differences can often result in relationship conflict because they involve contrasting viewpoints, ideas, opinions, feelings, emotions. So this can lead to interpersonal tensions and conflict in the workplace. So what I chose to use in this particular study was a psychometric instrument called the Allenson-Hayes Cognitive Style Index, These are actually my PhD students back in the late 90s. And they published this instrument in the Journal of Management Studies in 1996. They refer to intuitive thinking as people who just see the big picture. So they acquire information and knowledge through a non-conscious process, drawing on all elements of the situation, bring together, combine data in an unconstrained way, make connections and leap to conclusions without being able to explain why. They have this sense of knowing without being aware of why they know. So it's hunch, it's gut feeling. And they enjoy focusing on the bigger picture, and they avoid overanalyzing data. And they also thrive on unstructured situations. Now, the strength of these thinkers is that because it's non-conscious and unconstrained, it can draw on some elements of a situation that might be discounted by people who are more analytical as being irrelevant. And consequently, intuitive people can be more open to new possibilities and novel association of ideas than analysts. So the other extreme, analytic thinking, and bear in mind this is not dichotomous, it's not one or the other, it's a continuum. So analytic thinkers, they build the big picture. They have to build the big picture by analyzing bits and pieces of the overall problem and building them together to build the big picture. Whereas the intuitive thinkers just see it and they want to move quickly. So analytic thinking is about adopting an explicit and intentional approach to learning and problem solving. And they consciously attend to elements of the immediate situation that are perceived to be relevant, drawing on information stored in conscious memory and searching for logical connections between them. They tend to take logical step-by-step approaches to gathering and analysing information, and they rarely go beyond what the facts or information tell them before arriving at the conclusion or making a decision. So they prefer to gather as much factual and concrete information as possible and think about each part of the problem in turn. So this is an insight into the instrument. It's a 38-item instrument. It just takes 10 minutes to complete, and it gives you a score of between 0 and 76. If you score 0, and the lowest I've had in all the research I've done is a highly innovative, successful business guy. He scored 5 on the continuum. So a low score is high on intuition, and a high score of 76 is high on analysis. So you could segment that continuum if you really wanted to, as people, as researchers certainly like to do. So you might divide the scale up and say, so there may be highly intuitive, moderately intuitive, adaptive, or those bridges in the middle who can see things from the center both ways, maybe moderately analytic and highly analytic. Now, in relation to the task within the workplace, the bottom diagram just shows where these thinking types really come into their own. So if the task is highly structured, then you find that highly analytical individuals thrive in those sort of workplace environments. If the task is highly unstructured, then intuitives thrive. So this is task dependent in terms of these individual differences in cognitive style. So let me just give you a few quotations from the literature just to anchor the relevance of this into the field of management and business. So Natal, 1995, ways in which managers make decisions range from spontaneous to highly reasoned. And I'm sure you can see the connection there with the labels of analysis and intuition. The latter approach is neat, orderly, and structured. The former is characterized by intuition, judgment, and sometimes emotion. Confident decision-making is a blend of logic and intuition. By harnessing the power of logic and fusing it with the genius of intuition, we can sometimes produce explosive creativity. So this is really pointing at the importance of assembling teams, especially if we're looking at new innovative solutions, of assembling heterogeneous teams where you have a mix of both these analytic and intuitive types. And you manage the conflict. There will be conflict. You manage that conflict in the interest of generating higher levels of innovation. Henry Mintzberg, one of the biggest gurus in the world on management, in 1989 had a book out called Mintzberg on Management, and his opening chapter was planning on the left side, managing on the right, and it was all about left brain, right brain thinking, or analytic straight intuitive thinking. And he argued that effectiveness in management depends ultimately on the coupling of these analytic and intuitive processes. And Leonard and Strauss, who did an excellent article in the Harvard Business Review, so this is a quotation from that article. People with different styles often don't understand or respect one another. The detail guy dismisses the vision thing, and the concept man deplores endless analysis. Okay, let me make what I think is quite an important distinction, and that is between cognitive style and intelligence. So one is bipolar and one is unipolar. So intelligence, performance on all tasks will improve as intelligence increases. That's unidimensional. So the higher the level of ability, the better the performance. Now, cognitive style is quite unusual in that for an individual at one end of the style dimension, for example, highly analytic, a task of a type they find difficult, which may be a global, holistic, unstructured task, that they find difficult will be found easy by someone at the other end of the dimension, and vice versa. It's been argued that this is the missing link between personality and intelligence, individual differences in cognitive style, the missing link between personality and intelligence, especially in the workplace. So let me now move into our theory development and how we develop research hypotheses to determine the extent to which individual differences in cognitive style influence these organizational OCBs, citizenship behaviors. So the first body of literature we needed to get into was workplace diversity, because this is what we're looking at, diversity of individuals in the workplace in terms of their cognitive style. So workplace diversity, looking back at the literature over the years, these are some of the findings from the early research. So workplace diversity leads to problems with coordination and communication. Early team diversity research focused on surface level characteristics in the early days. Surface characteristics like demographics. So, people working together who are young females, young males, old females, old males, race differences. So these are all sort of surface level demographic characteristics that formed some of the early research to determine whether the extent to which these influence OCBs. Later research is calling for more studies into deep level characteristics. And one deep level characteristic of interest in organizational and managerial research is cognitive diversity. Now, this is conceptualized as differences in attitudes, beliefs, values, thinking styles, and I've given references to the articles that refer to this. Now, cognitive style, I would argue, is related to several of these facets of cognitive diversity. Cognitive styles influence the different thinking styles, different information processing that people adopt, task-related beliefs, assumptions, and perspectives, and cognitive dissimilarity has been linked to lower levels of cohesion in the workplace, and hence high levels of conflict. So particularly increased relationship conflict. And again, these references are to the articles that have conducted that research. And indeed, diversity of the analytic intuitive cognitive style that I've based my research on in this field has been shown to increase relationship conflict. And this came through quite a detailed study that was looking at other mediation and moderation effects. This was published in 2019 in the International Journal of Conflict Management, and it was Chi and Armstrong. So, so diversity leads to conflict, the literature tells us. So how might conflict relate to OCBs? Well, we know that relationship conflict leads to reduced cohesiveness, and that often results in negative social exchanges, and you would expect conflict. Members of teams with lower levels of conflict show a proclivity towards altruistic behaviors, which is interesting compared to OCBs, because altruism is one of the factors. So members of teams with lower levels of conflict show a proclivity to altruistic behaviors, resulting in increased levels of reciprocal helping behaviors among employees and increased levels of commitment to the organization. So such behaviors are important determinants of employees' willingness to engage in citizenship behaviors, and this came through research by Podsakoff et al. So we would therefore posit, having viewed these two bodies of literature, that relationship conflict will be negatively related to individual level OCBs. Now, the next body of literature or theory that we tapped into was the Similarity Attraction paradigm, first put forward by Byrne in 1971. There was actually a pop song about this as well at the time. So this is one of the most robust phenomena in social psychology. And it's about dissimilarity in personal attributes, tends to engender repulsion, whereas individuals are attracted to and like others who are similar to themselves. Subordinates who regard themselves as being similar to their supervisors, for example, are rated as being higher performance than others. And perceived similarity among leader-follower dyads. A dyad is a two-person team. You have an individual is one, a dyad is two people, and three or more is a team. So perceived similarity among leader-follower dyads leads to increased liking, levels of rapport, higher quality exchange relationships in the leader-subordinate relationship. And this came through a study I did with my supervisors way back when during my PhD. And higher quality relationships are positively related to mutual trust, respect, liking, and job satisfaction. So we're now making fairly strong connections between these theories that might link the importance of style to OCBs. We then drew on social exchange theory going way back to 1964 by Blau. Now, when subordinates perceive support, trust, and other tangible and intangible benefits from their leaders, and when they feel satisfied with their jobs, they reciprocate the positive treatment by engaging in behavior that directly benefits the organization, OCBs. And evidence has manifested that job satisfaction, as that increases, has robust correlations with employees' exhibition of OCBs as well. So we're now beginning to make very solid links between these various bodies. And we're at a stage now, from a theoretical perspective, where we can state a number of research hypotheses that we will address in our research. So we're interested in leader-subordinate cognitive style congruence, so similarity is what we mean, and its influence on followers' organizational citizenship behaviors. Now, we can recall from what I said earlier that analytic people focus on hard data. They break the problems down into constituent parts, study each part in detail, adopt very systematic search for understanding using a logical step-by-step approach to decision-making. The opposite person on this continuum, intuitive people, are more receptive to soft data. They experience an immediate sense of knowing. They adopt a global approach to processing information, emphasize synthesis and simultaneous integration of many inputs at the same time, preferring a more rapid and open-ended approach to decision-making using random methods of exploration. So we can see now, I think, that dissimilarities in cognitive style will accentuate negative characteristics and can often result in conflict. And I refer back to the study that we published last year. Conversely, similarity in style will result in enhanced leader-follower exchange relationships, increases in benefits on the part of the subordinate, improved subordinate satisfaction, and an obligation for leaders to reciprocate that positive treatment. For the subordinates to reciprocate positive treatment received by their leaders. So that leads us to our first hypothesis, and that is that leader-follower cognitive style similarity positively predicts followers' overall organizational citizenship behaviors. So let's just go back now to the dimensionality of OCBs, and I refer you back to those behaviours that are directed towards individuals. And the factors in there were courtesy and altruism, defined by Organ as helping others to solve problems, voluntary behaviours to help other people. So these interpersonal, cooperative and affiliative extra role behaviours are directed towards members of one's own work group. That's what OCBIs are all about. Now, leaders recognise these ICBs, and they tend to reciprocate through increased liking and trust in the relationships, positively influencing performance evaluations and reward distribution at the annual reviews. And this will have a reinforcing effect on maintaining and increasing these interpersonal behaviours. Now, these behaviours, as we've heard from my discussion of the theory of cognitive style, these behaviours are associated with people whose cognitive styles are more intuitive than analytic, because the latter tend to be more impersonal than interpersonal. And there's the research that underpins that in those three references. So that leads to our second hypothesis, and that is that leader-follower congruence at the extreme intuitive end of cognitive style continuum, so we're talking about intuitive followers working with intuitive leaders, will lead to higher levels of follower OCBIs being reported by their leaders. So that's hypothesis 2. So the second dimension is organizational citizenship behaviors directed towards the organization. And we can recall that Organ has these 3 factors of conscientiousness, sportsmanship, and civic virtue. So acceptance and adherence to rules and regulations of the organization, willingness to tolerate less than ideal circumstances, taking a natural interest in the life of the organization. Now, collectively, those 3 factors have been referred to as generalized compliance. People tend to be more compliant. This generalized compliance is often driven by the fact that they have their eyes set on expected rewards and avoidance of punishment. So behaviors associated with these factors then in this dimension, we would argue are aligned with people whose cognitive styles are more analytic than intuitive. So analytic people are more impersonal than the interpersonal nature of intuitive people. Analytics tend to initiate more task-oriented acts than socio-emotional-oriented acts of intuitive people. This came again through some research I did early on with one of my PhD students. They tend to be more compliant, adhering to company rules and regulations. That came through research by Michael Curtin into the influence of cognitive styles. Analytics tend to be more rule-oriented and dependent on formal procedures, and they're more concerned about self-related benefits, such as rewards and promotions, than maintaining personal relationships. So that leads us to our final hypothesis, which is number 3, and that is that leader-follower congruence at the extreme end, analytic end of the cognitive style continuum will lead to higher levels of follower OCBs oriented towards organizations. So analytic followers working with analytic leaders. So this is the theory. These are the research hypotheses. So we now need to, at this stage of the project, determine the methodology that we will adopt in order to test our theory. So these were the methods that we adopted. So we addressed a sample from the People's Republic of China in 6 manufacturing organizations. These were, there was some translation here involved. Data were collected from 134 leaders and 218 followers, so a very significant sample from that population. The measures we used to measure people, their cognitive style, we used the Allenson-Hayes Cognitive Style Index that I mentioned, a 38-item index. It takes 10 minutes to complete. That places the individuals on this continuum from analysis to intuition. And we used, for organizational citizenship behaviors, we used the 24-item scale that was developed by Podzakoff, McKenzie, Morman, and Fetter. And that has been used an incredible amount in some of the top journals in the world. So it's a highly valid and reliable instrument for measuring OCBs. So how did we analyze the data? Well, you have to wonder, how would you measure similarity or congruence? And the obvious way of doing this might be to use a difference score. So take my score as a leader of 52 and take my subordinate score of 12, and the difference is 40 points. And so we can look at the extent to which we are different or alike by looking at difference scores. The problem with that is you also then have to do a median split. And this method is also known to suffer through more recent research with numerous methodological problems. So what we used is something that is quite new to the field of organizational psychology. It's very complex, and I think as a result, there have been few studies to date that have used this approach. But some of the top journals are seeking more and more studies that have taken the approach of using what's called polynomial regression. Whilst it's complex mathematically, it does give us something called a response surface analysis that is a pictorial view of complex relationships. And I'll give you some examples of that in the next slide. So it produces a three-dimensional surface relating to person-environment outcomes and gives us a very clear interpretation of the results. And it shows the effects of each component measure, so follower cognitive style, leader cognitive style, and how these impact on the outcome variable of organizational citizenship behaviors. So we are getting toward the end. Let's look at the results. So the first thing to say is that this is hypothesis one. So this is looking at leader-follower cognitive style congruence. And we argued that this would lead to higher levels of OCBs. So let me just to show you around this three-dimensional graph. So on the y-axis, for example, this is leader cognitive style. On the x-axis, we have follower cognitive style. And a score of 1 is someone as at the extreme analytic end. A score of -1 is extremely intuitive. And we have the same for the follower as the leader. Now the z-axis, this one up here, is organizational citizenship behaviors. Now, if you can follow this, if we were to, this is the congruence line through this graph. So at any point on that line, there is congruence, there's exact similarity. So if there is a score of 0, if there's someone intermediate position between intuitive and analytic here, then you would get the same here, and they would be congruent. So if you had a highly analytic leader and a highly analytic subordinate or follower, then we would be at this point. So this is a line of congruence. Now, this is the line of incongruence. So if we look at the results that we plotted, you can see very clearly that there is significantly higher levels of organizational citizenship behaviors when there is congruence, whether it be highly congruent in terms of intuitive leader and intuitive subordinate, or whether it be analytic leader, analytic subordinate, or whether it be any combination of congruence between the two. What's interesting is that this is marginally higher when we have intuitive leader, intuitive subordinate working together, marginally higher than when we have analytic leader and subordinate working together. But that condition itself is higher than those down the midpoint. But the startling finding is that as you get incongruence, so this line, so you have people who are mismatched a little bit here at these points, but mismatched extensively at these points, you see that OCBs drops off almost exponentially. So that concludes hypothesis one, the results and the data analysis, and we can conclude that hypothesis one is supported. If we now plot our results for organization citizenship behaviors oriented towards individuals. Hypothesis 2 was suggesting that intuitive leaders working with intuitive subordinates would deliver higher levels of OCBs than other forms of congruence. And we can see that that is supported. We have highly intuitive leader and highly intuitive subordinates working together, and this is the level of OCBs we see. And again, if we move into incongruence, then OCBs tail off exponentially. And as we move down through the congruence curve, through to the mid-ranges of the cognitive style index, and finally onto analytic and subordinates and analytic leaders, then these are at a lower level than intuitive leaders working with intuitive subordinates. So that would appear to support hypothesis 2. Now, hypothesis 3 was, we've got a similar curve. We can see that when we have congruence, irrespective of whether we have intuitive, analytic, or mid-range matches, they are higher than incongruent or mismatches at every point of the curve. What we don't see is that analytic dyads, which is this point here, analytic leader, analytic subordinate, we don't see that as being significantly higher than people matched on at other points on this congruence curve. So whilst it still delivers higher levels of OCBs, it doesn't quite support fully our hypothesis number 3. So broadly speaking, I mean, the study has shown that the results are generally consistent, highly consistent with Burn's similarity attraction paradigm. And as I've just said, these are the graphs associated with each of the 3 hypotheses. And we saw that hypothesis 1 was supported. So overall OCBs are supported, are higher when we have similarities. Hypothesis 2 about intuitive dyads being matched was supported. Hypothesis 3 was partially supported, though not fully. So we're nearing the end now, you'll be pleased to know. So let me just go through some of the implications of all this. So practical significance really depends on whether cognitive style is stable or whether it's malleable. Can it be changed? Could we train people to change their cognitive style? That would be interesting if we could do that, because we would have some real impacts on life in organizations. But the evidence so far shows that it's more than likely stable. It's more oriented towards personality that is relatively fixed. So organizations might then benefit from considering similarity when attempting to develop leader-subordinate partnerships and indeed teams, from the research that I've just shared with you. We might consider matching leaders and followers to increase OCBs for improvements in both individual and organizational level success factors as measured through the OCB instrument. We could possibly train leaders to learn flexibility of style and to adopt different approaches according to the style of their followers with whom they're dealing. So you could imagine a leader being highly intuitive, and he may be assembling a team of 5 or 6 highly analytic people to resolve some sort of organizational problem. So how does he deal with this big mismatch between he and the others? Well, if they had a level of if they had a level of understanding about this construct, cognitive style, then they may just be able to learn some sort of flexibility approaches to adapt to into situations. And I think one of the really important thing that organizations should consider if they got into this sort of field is the idea of bridges. So you imagine a team such as the ones that were reported in the Harvard Business Review that I'll share with you in a minute. You know, a team of 6-7 people looking for new innovative products and solutions. If you assemble a team of 6 intuitives and a team of 6 analytics, you'll get completely different dynamics. What will work best in that environment would be a rich mix of analytic and individual people, because that will lead to conflict. And Leonard and Strauss would argue that you need a leader needs to manage that conflict in the interest of new innovative ideas coming out. And I would refer to the concept of bridges. So if you have highly analytics, highly intuitives, and consider those people right in the middle of this continuum, scoring 38 on the cognitive style index, they have the ability to see things from the center, looking both ways. So they could be useful bridges in a team in managing that conflict and bringing people together and generating new ideas. So increasing awareness of cognitive styles through training and development, I think, could avoid lots of frustration in organizations and disengagement in some situations and conflict. And just to reiterate, intuitive members get frustrated by the insistence of analyzing every aspect of the situation and by spending too much time gathering facts. And conversely, analytics find intuitive approaches very frustrating and chaotic. And they remain unconvinced by arguments because they often lack facts and logical arguments that underpin an analytic person's reasoning. So I'm finished. But let me just, before I move on and say goodbye, let me just introduce you to 3 really useful learning resources for those who might be interested. I published an article some years ago, 2012, I think, in the International Journal of Management Reviews, called The Role of Cognitive Styles in Business and Management. And I, with my co-authors, reviewed 40 years of research. We looked at all aspects of organizations, leadership, mentoring, teamwork, many aspects. So that gives a good overview of the role of cognitive styles in business and management. The second resource I would recommend is by Leonard and Strauss. These are 2 professors at Harvard University Business School, both professors of innovation in the workplace. And they wrote a really interesting article in 1996, very penetrable from non-academics. They called it Putting Your Organization's Whole Brain to Work. And that metaphor comes from early thinking in this field of research that referred to right brain thinkers as being the highly intuitive, spontaneous, global thinkers, and left brain thinkers as being analytical. So that's and they discuss this in the context of innovation. And the third article is the one I've just shared with you. This is the influence of leader-follower cognitive style similarity on OCBs. Now I can share these with anyone watching this video, and in order to do that, then any interest at all, just simply email me on this email address, sjarmstrong@lincoln.ac.uk. I've published extensively in this particular field of individual differences psychology, and I've examined influences on leadership, mentoring, supervision, performance, self-managing work teams, conflict, entrepreneurial drive, OCBs I've just shared with you, gender differences, cross-cultural influences, scenario planning in the world of strategic thinking, and interpersonal behaviors. So I'd just like to thank you for your time. I'm sorry if that took longer than you might have expected, but I hope you found it useful, and I hope that I may hear from some of you at some point in the future. Thank you very much.